Good evening. Thank you for joining us, everyone. We are coming to you live from the beautiful Dunoon Borough Hall, where we are joined with David Gordon, who's going to give us a walk and talk tour of his Fishing the Minch exhibition. This exhibition is part of Street Level's Everything Flows programme, which is a coastal exhibition trail across a number of venues, a number of events, a number of exhibitions. So please do visit our website and find out more information about the exhibitions that we've got on. It's my great pleasure tonight to introduce David Gordon, who's going to give us a tour of his exhibition. The exhibition closes on Sunday, so tomorrow and Sunday are your last days to catch the exhibition. So if you do want to come over to Dunoon and see it, make sure you don't miss out. Tomorrow and Sunday, last days to see the show. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to David and hear more about his exhibition. Thank you very much.
Thank you to John, thank you to Street Level and to the Borough Hall for putting on this exhibition, and thank you very much for watching. I'm going to take you a little meander around Stornoway in the late 70s, early 80s. Although the exhibition is called Fishing the Minch, there is a little bit more to it. It's more of about the town of Stornoway and about what was happening in Stornoway at the time. So I'll point out a few pictures on the way. Stornoway is the northwest of Scotland on the Isle of Lewis. You'll see it on your weather map in the top left-hand corner. We've got an aerial picture of Stornoway here taken in 1980, showing mostly the outer harbour, and just to give you an idea of the sort of size and position of Stornoway. As we go through the exhibition, you'll see there's a few larger, seemingly random pictures stuck to the wall rather than in frames, which kind of, it's a bit of a takes us back to how the photographs were originally shown, fly-posted to a hoarding in the East End of London in 1980. But I'll come to that again. So I'll start by talking about some of these pictures which are of fishing. This is a photograph taken very early in the morning. It seemed to be 4 o'clock in the morning, or a ridiculously early time to me, but I think it was probably 6. Before light, the guys got out of their bunks and they're shooting the nets, which just means that they push the nets over the end of the boat. These guys are controlling the winches to allow the nets to sink to the seabed. After this, I think they went back to their bunks and eventually had some breakfast. And after a few hours, then the trawl would be taken back on board and fish would be sorted out. These are just general life on board the fishing boat, really, which comprised of sending out the nets, bringing them back in, gutting the fish, sorting them into boxes and so forth. A bit of standing around waiting for the nets to come back aboard, and a cup of tea in between the nets coming aboard and more work having to be done. So this is Donald MacDonald, who was the skipper of the Fiery Cross, which is the boat that we're out to sea on. He was a family friend, and that was what has enabled me to get on board and photograph the fishing industry. I was really trying to show people how fish got to their shops, because it's not something that you would ever know about unless you worked on a trawler or were part of the fishing industry. And a lot of the time I think I'm trying to show photographs to say, have you seen this? You know, did you know about this? This is what I find interesting about photography, is you can show people something that they've never thought about, that they've never seen, or perhaps if you have seen it, you've never really kind of paid any attention to it. So it kind of tried to highlight things. And the time that these pictures were being taken, for example, there was no fishing for herring. There was a shortage of herring, and herring had been banned from being caught. This is a photograph of the fishing boat, the Alpha, which is very similar to the Fiery Cross, which was Fishing the Minch. So the Minch is the stretch of water which is between the Western Isles and mainland Scotland. It's about 40 miles wide or so at its widest. Nothing to be seen but sea. So a very kind of, again, typical scene of one of a very typical fishing boats. This is Norman Jammy McPhail working on the Fiery Cross. What he's doing here is making ready for this, what is called the otter board, to be released off the side of the boat. And the otter board helps to keep the net wide as it's trawled across the bottom of the sea. Jammy, I recently learned, very unfortunately, was lost. He was drowned, but the terrible thing is he wasn't drowned as a fisherman. He didn't lose his life in this very dangerous profession off a fishing boat, but he was actually drowned while swimming off a beach in Lewis, which is a very sad story. So, life on board the fishing boats. This is a typical result of a trawl. The nets would be opened, what they call the cod end, and the contents spilled out onto the deck of the boat, and then they would shovel it up onto this kind of makeshift bench here, literally sitting on the side of the boat and sorting the fish into the different species, cleaning them, and eventually put them into different boxes or creel baskets. These, obviously, you don't see this kind of wooden box anymore, or these creels. And in this one here we have a creel full of what I know as prawns, what everyone else seems to call langoustines. And back in the day you didn't buy langoustines with the claws on them. The fishermen actually took the claws off and cleaned the prawns, which made them worth more money at the market, as it was less work for other people to do. Before we move on, I'll just tell you how I came to take these photographs. I grew up in Edinburgh and in Stornoway and in London, and I became interested in photography. And while I was in London, I went to a school where the art teacher would let me go out and visit exhibitions. And one day I went to the Half Moon Photography Workshop in Bethnal Green, and that was an organisation which published a magazine called Camera Work, and they organised exhibitions which toured all around the country, and they were building a resource centre for photographers, a gallery and darkroom facilities, and none of that was at that time completed. But I met lots of other photographers there, and they encouraged me to go out and take photographs, that I should have a little kind of project to do. And I went off and took photographs on the Woolwich Ferry, which a 5-minute crossing between Woolwich and North Woolwich in East London. And I'd go back every couple of weeks, show them my pictures, my contact sheets, and they'd give me some helpful advice. And as time went on, I became more confident about taking photographs and was looking for a different project to do. So I was always telling them where I came from, where I grew up on the island. There was fishing boats, there was Harris Tweed, there was all these things, and they encouraged me to go back to the Western Isles, go back to Stornoway, and to take some photographs there. So that's exactly what I did, to try and tell a story about the island. And so in effect, these photographs are really my photographic education through the Half Moon, how I learned to be a photographer. I took most of these pictures in 1978, again in 1979, and by which time in 1980 I was actually working with a photographer in Stornoway, and I was always continuing to take my own photographs as well as the commercial work that I would do for the photographer there. So what eventually happened with the photographs was that at the Half Moon Photography Workshop, which was seemingly never finished, a couple of dozen of them were fly posted as an exhibition. We have, there was a hoarding, and hopefully we have a photograph here to show the results of fly posting on the hoarding of a building site in East London. I made some prints. I made a couple of sets of prints, assuming that they would be graffitied and torn down and ripped, and we literally pasted them up with wallpaper paste. They stuck up there for a couple of months, nobody touched them. People came and looked at them, which was great. And I've still got the second set of prints, so if anyone needs to put up a fly-posted exhibition, I'll even supply the wallpaper paste. So while all the fishing is going on land, the general daily life in the cafes, in the villages outside Stornoway, there's a couple outside their house in a village called Back, which I now know kind of references American Gothic by Grant Wood, which I had no idea of at the time. But I think every photographer has to have their own version of American Gothic. These photographs is just, again, general scenes around the island. We don't know who this chap is, just what he's thinking. Maybe he's an old fisherman or a merchant navy seaman looking over the harbour in Stornoway. Some people waiting for a bus at the bus station in Cromwell Street in Stornoway, just chatting, passing the time of day as they wait for their bus, including a couple of young girls who are waiting to get the bus home for the weekend. They'll have been living in hostel in Stornoway while they went to the Nicholson Institute there, and they were only able to go home every week. I think this couple of girls were from Ness, in the north of the island. And also in Ness, in the north of the island, there's a photograph here of Chrissy and Angus MacLean cutting peat. A very unusual scene to see a woman wearing trousers. She's only doing that because she's cutting the peat. Peat's still cut, much less so, and older people obviously find it more difficult, especially if their family have left the island. And nowadays, I think you'll find that most people have oil for their heating. This too is a quite typical scene of the island. This abandoned car in a field, again I think near Back. I believe the island did seem at that time to be covered in broken down vehicles, and I believe that the reason was it was too expensive to take them off the island. The price of the scrap metal didn't make it worthwhile taking it away, so they tend to rust away in fields. And this is just one scene that I came across very early one Sunday morning, a rabbit in its hutch in somebody's garden just in Stornoway there. So the style of these photographs is very much, your classic black and white documentary. They're full frame, uncropped. Most of them you can see the black border around here. And I never intended to make any romantic pictures. It was very, very much the opposite. I didn't want to make romantic pictures. I didn't want to show a kind of Sunday supplement colour magazine kind of view of the islands. I wanted to show the real life, what it was really like, how tough it was being a fisherman in that very kind of dangerous world. As you've seen there, literally sitting on the side of the boat gutting the fish. You could be swept away at any moment. And I think I was very much influenced by other photographers at the time, for example, Chick Chalmers, who did a set of photographs on the Orkney Islands called Life in the Orkney Islands, which were a great influence to me as I went to Lewis to take these pictures. So as life continues on board the Fiery Cross, again here is Donald MacDonald on the bridge, this time when he's sou'wester. He's obviously just come back from doing something on deck and is making sure we're not aiming for any other fishing boats or anything. What I find fascinating today about this photograph is this unit here, which is called a decker. That's what fishing boats had before GPS. This series of gauges, of coloured gauges, would tell the fishing boat what its position was on the sea. Which there were radio transmissions from different parts of the country, and they would then note these numbers and look on a special chart to work out exactly where they were. Nowadays, of course, you just have to pick up your phone and you know exactly where you are in the world. Here we are in the galley. This is Jamie again, making some soup. I do remember being very well fed on the fishing boat. There was always bacon and egg breakfasts. There was always soup for lunchtime. There was always some roast lamb cooking away. We'd never ate fish. I never remember having any fish. Perhaps they didn't like fish, perhaps they didn't want to eat the profits. Nonetheless, I was very, very well fed. We're kind of here today because a few years ago I was contacted by a student, and she had seen a cutting in a newspaper in the East End publicising the original fly-posted exhibition. And she wanted to know more about this. So she was researching, and she has eventually published a book. Naomi Stacey's book is Photography of Protest and Community, the Radical Collectives of the 1970s, which naturally I recommend. So her getting in touch with me was the kind of catalyst for looking through all of these pictures again. And I'd already started to scan a few, but that really got me going. And I was given the facilities at Street Level in Glasgow, where they have the wonderful set of dark rooms if you want to make your own prints, develop your own films, but especially a very high resolution scanner. So I was able to look through all my original contact sheets and take them to Street Level and scan them on their scanner. And what that enabled me to do was, as well as find lots of images which had just been missed over the course of time, was find some images which were technically very, very difficult. I would never have attempted to try and print. And a typical example of this is the laughing girls here who are laughing about a flood. This is the negative for this is I couldn't possibly print it. It's very, very thin. If you've ever developed your own photographs, you will know what that means. There's very, very little detail in the original negative. But through these wonderful facilities at Street Level, I was able to kind of bring something back and get some detail. And I, of course, never noticed that the girl is laughing. They're having a great time as the floodwaters have come across at a high tide and flooded the town for a few minutes. I think we'll just move on to the fish market. Here is the Firing Cross. In fact, just coming into Stornoway Harbour. Anyone who's ever been to Stornoway will recognise the castle there, which is now a very fine museum and self-catering if you want to go and have a wee holiday in Stornoway. Again, these are pictures which I think I would have overlooked at the time. They weren't sharp enough, they weren't kind of like good enough. But, you know, as the years progressed and things have changed, you know, when I take photographs, I think they've got this kind of like real immediacy to them, you know, that there's a photograph. And then as years go on, they slightly change. You know, after a few years, you look at a photograph and think, well, yeah, that's kind of stale. It's not very interesting anymore. Or it just looks old-fashioned, or there's something just not quite right about it. But then, you know, years go on, and society changes, and you look at the photographs again, and suddenly they are of interest. So what wasn't a very interesting photograph to me all those years ago, because it was kind of slightly out of focus and very dark, suddenly I think is much more interesting now. You know, it's because the scenes have changed so much. It's of great interest, a kind of bit of social history. So this is the Firing Cross. We're on board the Firing Cross here, unloading the fish into the fish market at Stornoway. There'd be a fish market twice a week in Stornoway, on a Tuesday and a Thursday night. The boats would generally either go out for a day. They'd go out day tripping, come back into the town in the evening, go back again the next night, but always in town for the Tuesday and the Thursday nights. Or sometimes there would be longer trips. On one of the trips I went on the Fiery Cross was for the whole week. We went much further down the Minch, beyond the Shant Islands, and we would spend nights in harbour somewhere in the Eusts before going back to fish again during the day. and then finally on the Thursday afternoon come back into Stornoway for the fish market on the Thursday. And these are quite typical scenes. So we've got a skate and the auction going on here with guys bidding for fish in the wooden boxes there. Skate's something I never eat, and the reason is because of Jamie, who I remember they had a haul of fish which included a skate, and as the nets opened, the skate came out with all the other stuff. And Jamie picked up that skate and put it back into the sea, and I kind of like looked puzzled at him. And he told me that he thought that skate might be 60 years old. It was an old fish, an old mature fish. And if they took it to the market, they might only get 50 pence for it. And that just didn't seem right to him. So I found that very interesting, and I don't eat skate. So I love this picture. I don't know why, it could have been me a few years earlier, kind of small inquisitive boys at the fish market, just watching the boats coming in so as they can unload their fish. And down below there's fish boxes, which again, you don't see wooden fish boxes nowadays. Fish will be packed up in plastic boxes. And if you can see the bottom picture there's the guy dragging a box of fish into the market. And also on the quay, just have a look at this scene here. Talking of photographs which I'd kind of missed or never really seen before, somehow this photograph of the painting and of the quay escaped me. This scene was happening prior to the visit by the Queen to come and open a new council building in 1979 or 1979, I think, or 1980. And hopefully you can see a bigger version of this on screen now. The guy operating the crane doesn't seem too bothered, he's just smoking a cigarette. There's guys in a bucket which was normally used to scoop coal from a coal ship which used to come into Stornoway, or any kind of dry stuff they would scoop up. But instead they put a guy in so as he can do a little bit of painting or adjusting to the side of the quay where the Queen is going to arrive. And there's a guy you can see kind of giving directions to the crane driver who clearly can't see what's going on the other side of the quay. It's not a scene you'd see today, really. Although, having said that, I did come across a very similar scene in 2019 when I was having my usual wander around the harbour. The same thing was happening, but this time the guys over the side of the quay were in a specially purpose-built cage, and they had hard hats on, they had safety vests which were obviously life jackets. The entire area was cordoned off, you couldn't get near it. And it just goes to show how times have changed. There's another photograph, this next photograph, I think I missed from the original edits and contact sheets, is of the Ocean Gain being painted on Goat Island, which is where all the maintenance or boat maintenance goes on. There's a little shipyard there where they haul the boats up onto the slipway, and they can clean the bottoms of all the various things that get caught, the barnacles and things like that get caught in the bottom of the boat, and repaint them. And I think I missed this photograph because at the time I was also photographing other things, including the Harris Tweed industry. And I'd been in the Harris Tweed mill one morning photographing the work going on there, which we'll see in a few moments. And the mill, everyone went for lunch, so nothing was happening. So I left the mill and went for a little wander, and I obviously found myself at Goat Island, took 2, maybe 3 photographs, and then went back to the mill. So in the contact sheets of the Harris Tweed, I'm just looking for Harris Tweed pictures, and then there's a couple of pictures of a fishing boat. Well, I'm not looking for pictures of fishing at the moment, and I'm trying to edit out the Harris Tweed pictures. So that picture was completely missed for all these years, and I think it's a great picture. Contact sheets, for those of you who are purely digital, there's some examples of contact sheets here. So after the film is developed, it is literally put on top of a sheet of photographic paper, and that paper is then exposed. So the negative is in contact with the paper. And these are the results. And from these contact sheets, you would go through with a little magnifier loop and try and work out which pictures you thought were worth looking at and mark them up. You can see here they've originally been marked up with a red Chinograph. And from there, I'd make some 5x7 or 6x4 inch prints, and then you kind of like lay them out and edit the pictures in that way. So you start off with 36 pictures. Here I've marked up about 5, and I think the last one at the end here is a good picture. So of all of those pictures, only one was that good that it made it into the exhibition. So I'll take you back to the fishing industry. Here's fish being taken from the boats in bulk to a fish processing factory. Anyone who lived in Stornoway at the time will remember the smell of the gut factory. So fish there was turned into meal for animal food. So I think and this is just literally a lorry load of fish being dumped into a silo, which was then processed. I've got no idea how. I didn't want to stick around too long. It didn't smell so good. But also on Goat Island, where the ships would be repaired, was another fish processing factory. This is Scottish Seafoods, which was part of Young's. They still make frozen foods to this day. And here we can see what's happening to the prawns, which we saw being caught on the boat earlier on. And they had all been, as I say, had their heads taken off, had their arms taken off, you know what I mean. They were then frozen and put into these 1 pound bags of they called peeled scampi, which was then shipped away and sold in supermarkets. The centre photograph here is in a different factory. That was Olsen's, and here they're salting, I think, mackerel at the time. At the time, that person was earning £1.10 an hour for having to cover his hands in salt and put them into the bottom of this barrels. Slightly better paid, bizarrely, in the Youngs. The women there were earning £1.35 an hour, which, if you work out, is probably something around about the minimum wage today. This woman is weighing out lobsters, which were, I remember, held in a pond on Goat Island. Obviously, the lobster fishermen would bring them in. They were kept alive, put into boxes, and then literally went on a flight to London, to a fancy restaurant in London. And again, here's, but there was about 35 women working in this factory in absolutely freezing cold conditions, without any protection on their hands, because that, obviously the prawns have to be kept cold to be fresh, and they're peeling them before they were finally frozen and put into the bags. But they seem to enjoy their work there. I talked earlier about the Harris Tweed. So there's some photographs here taken in the Harris Tweed mill. This is, I think, the carding machine. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. So spinning the wool, which was used to make Harris Tweed. Pretty much the same thing goes on today. What I find interesting about this photograph is when I go into factories these days, and I just love going into factories and seeing people do a proper job and are doing some real work. Factories are much cleaner places nowadays. You can see all the bits of wool all across the floor here. I was recently in a fire engine factory photographing some work going on there, and the place was absolutely spotless, and there was constantly guys going around with rags making sure there was no oil or anything spilled. So factories have changed over the years. So the mill would spin the wool, which was then given to the weavers. And here's a weaver and his helper with the wool which comes from the mill, and he then loads this onto his loom. Hopefully we've got a closer picture of this we can show you. This is a traditional Hattersley Harris Tweed loom, which was called hand-operated, hand-woven, but the guy is actually pumping it with his feet. I think these mills have now been superseded by what they call a double-width mill, which is a double-width loom, which is a much lighter, more modern loom, in order to make a wider tweed, which has a bigger market. These looms are, I think, very trendy now. You'll find them in all sorts of places making hipster jackets and things. So after work, we can go to the pub. This is a singer in the lounge bar of the Carlton. Again, it's probably a picture that I wouldn't have liked at the time because it was a bit messy. There's a kind of hand in the way and there's people in the way, but that's actually now what I think makes the picture, the fact that there's that hand with the glass grabbing their drink. And this band is Rough Justice, playing a gig somewhere of traditional Scottish rock music. No, not really. But the more traditional music, the pipe band here are playing. Well, they were playing they used to march up and down the town on a Friday evening or something, and play their pipes. It was pouring with rain, so they took shelter in the fish market and marched up and down the fish market, playing their bagpipes, which makes a great picture. I think I promised some people chips. Do you want to go and get some chips? We can move over here to the chip shop. A typical Friday night scene, Friday night or Saturday night in the chip shop here. The chip shop still exists. I highly recommend it. It's on Church Street. They do very good fish. And later we can move on to the pub. And a slightly unfortunate scene at closing time in the Carlton bar. One of the customers helping there to tidy up, one of the customers not so well. Of course, after all that drinking, you will have to go to church on Sunday. And here's a very typical scene outside a church on Sunday. This last picture here, I think, is just a final kind of view across the almost at the end of fishing. I kind of think that this picture has become it's almost the end of looking back, the kind of sunset on the fishing industry. There are far fewer fishing boats in Stornoway today than there were at the time I took these pictures, which then there would have been 20 or 30 boats. Nowadays, I think there are maybe 5 or 10 at most regularly fishing. Before we end, I'm just going to say, I've kind of carefully looked after all my negatives all this time. And, I really like to encourage people to do that, to look after your negatives, but also to look after your digital pictures. I don't photograph on film anymore. I know some people do, and they love doing that, but lots of people take lots of pictures digitally. And, it's very easy to delete your pictures. Don't do that, keep them, because they might be ordinary pictures today, and in a couple of years' time, as I said, they will look very stale and they'll look a bit kind of dated, but give them time and they will become very interesting again. So, maybe in another 40 years' time, your pictures, your digital pictures, keep them, look after them, and they will become like these, a portal back into a kind of lost time. The last picture I'm going to show you is the Sullivan, the ferry leaving Stornoway, which is kind of sad because I think that's the way a lot of my friends of those years would leave the island. depopulation is still a big problem in the island. There seems to be very little to keep young people on the island, and they will leave the island not necessarily on this ferry because it's been superseded a couple of times, but that's the ferry kind of, leaving Stornoway. And that's where I think I have to leave you. Thank you very much. I hope you might have some questions. If you want to ask about any of the photographs, I'll try to answer those questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. That was fascinating. There's been lots of really lovely comments and questions coming in, so I think I'm just going to hit you with some.
Go on then.
Isolt Timmermans, one of my colleagues from Street Level, she was asking, said, I hope you don't mind me asking this, but how old were you when you took these pictures?
17, I think. 17. Yeah, about 17. So I think my education was kind of like disrupted slightly by moving schools around, and that's why the art teacher in a school that I ended up in kind of like gave me this freedom to go and look at exhibitions, because there was a couple of lessons I missed because I had moved from Scotland to England. So I was probably 16 when I knocked on the door of Half Moon Photography Workshop, and 17 or 18 by the time I took most of these pictures. I was probably 18 by the time I took the picture in the pub. Probably.
Well, this follows on quite nicely from a question from Nick McGowan Lowe. It says, really great work, David. In what ways did it help coming back to re-edit, having had 40 years more experience as a photographer?
Thanks, Nick. I think what I've said, especially about the picture of the singer in the bar there, is that there are pictures that I thought that's no good because somebody's got in the way of that picture. There's a glass, it's out of focus. And I now know after all these years that helps to make a picture. That does make a picture. I think at the time I was always looking for this kind of very straight, simple, almost graphic image. And I obviously succeeded in doing that. And anything which kind of got in the way from that wasn't so good. So the photograph, for example, of the laughing girls, and it might not look perfect, a perfect composition, but it still makes a great picture, I think. And I think those are the kind of things that I've learned over the years. It doesn't have to be in focus.
Exactly, yeah. And it's interesting what you were saying, that piece of advice for younger photographers to keep their negatives, keep their files, and let things kind of stew and find their own way.
Exactly, yeah.
A question from me personally, you spoke about the experience of going to Half Moon and doing the Paste Up exhibition, and I wondered if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the material that actually came from that original exhibition back in the day.
There is, this is an original flyer which we made for the exhibition back in the day, and we sent it out to newspapers and magazines to get a little bit of publicity for the show. It does actually promise that I will supply a bucket of paste and a set of prints if you want to have your own version of this exhibition on your hoarding somewhere. It was great. The exhibition, as I say, stuck up. I mean, literally stuck up on the wall and stayed there for a couple of months. And that surprised me, and people would stop and look at the pictures, which from Roman Road in Bethnal Green to the Western Isles, literally worlds apart. Yeah. And in those days, even more so. A different planet to what was happening in the East End.
And was there ever any opportunity or possibility even for you to have a fly posted exhibition in Stornoway? I know you showed the pictures in Stornoway a couple of years ago. But at the time, was there ever any hope that something like that was even feasible?
And to be honest, I was never really thought about it, because I don't know. I suppose it's the correct thing to do, to take the pictures back to the place that you photographed them to let people see them. But no, I think after it was a couple of years later, and they'd started to seem a little bit stale. So already that process was going on. Yeah. So no, that would be a good idea if I can tell myself 40 years ago, hey, maybe we could paste them up on somewhere in Stornoway.
Because this kind of leads on from a question from Morag Ramsey, who asks, are your photographs accessible or available to the community in Lewis, apart from the exhibition which took place there? They seem so important as a social history resource.
Yeah, I mean, the exhibition in Stornoway was really successful, which took place at the end of 2019, thanks to Street Level, who produced the whole thing. You know, I would go into the gallery when I was there. I wanted to do some photographs just of the, you know, the general scenes, and I would go in with my tripod and think, well, I'll go up when there's nobody there. And there was a constant flow of people. I couldn't take pictures of my exhibition because there was too many people there.
It's a nice problem to have.
Yeah. So yeah, it was really successful, and I have talked with the museum in Stornoway, and I would love them to have the prints,
yeah,
so that they can be part of their permanent collection once we've finished showing them here.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple of other places, but yeah, for sure, that's what I would love to happen, for them to be looked after by the Stornoway Museum.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great point to end it. I just want to say thank you once more to David. Thank you for the wonderful insights into the exhibition. Thank you everyone who's tuned in at home and joined us over Facebook. There's lots of comments and questions and things that we just didn't have time to get through, but I know that you're on Facebook, so if you want to reply to any of them, they'll stay in the feed afterwards. And once again, just to let everyone know that tomorrow and Sunday are the last days to see the exhibition. If you can't make it along, there is a 3D tour that you can view through our website, and if you're one of these fancy people that has a VR headset, you can actually walk through the exhibition in virtual reality, which is quite exciting. Please do check out our website for more information on our Everything Flows exhibition programme, and do stay tuned. We've got a lot more talks and events lined up as well that will be streamed through Facebook. So once more, just thank you very much, David. Thank you for watching home.
Thank you.
See you guys later. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.